Chapter 1831, Full-Scale Defense. At the main control center, the basic construction of the infrastructure is already complete. The Soul Masters of the Blood God Legion, the Spirit Pagoda, the Tang Sect, and the Battle God Hall are currently setting up the new Blood God Array to seal the exit. Guanzi nodded with a pleased expression upon hearing this. Everything was progressing in a positive direction. Initially, they were being completely dominated by their enemies, but since then, the enemies had been forced back, and they could finally heave a sigh of relief. Chen Xinji asked, after the Blood God Array is completed, will it be able to oppose the abyssal passageway if it reconnects with our plane? The question was directed toward Cao Daja. Over at the Blood God Legion, he was the main figure responsible for protecting the Blood God Array, so no one was more familiar with the array's abilities than he was. Cao Daja shook his head in response. It won't be able to completely shut down the passageway. The situation here is different from the one over at the Blood God Legion. The Blood God Legion has set up the array inside the passageway, thereby obstructing it at the source, making it very difficult for the abyssal creatures to come out, and even if cracks appear, they can be easily filled. However, this seal is being set up on our own plane. The abyssal passageway has disappeared, but it hasn't been sealed, so if it appears again, a large number of abyssal creatures will still be able to rush out right away. Of course, with the Blood God Array here, it'll be able to prevent the abyssal creatures from emerging for at least a short time, thereby giving us enough time to set up resistance and restrict them to this area. If you ask me, even if we have enough time to complete the Blood God Array, I suggest we still set up at least 3 more defensive lines surrounding the site. If they dare to return, we have to strive to set up the Blood God Array seal right on top of their abyssal passageway at all costs. If we succeed, we'll be able to completely cut off this passageway. Currently, I'm actually more worried about the Holy Spirit cult. We don't know how many powerful beings of the Abyss and the Holy Spirit cult have been killed by the Eternal Heaven Blast, but I have a feeling that Demon Sovereign won't die that easily. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to lead the Holy Spirit cult for so many years. On top of that, the fact that they were able to open this abyssal passageway indicates that they've already learned the abyssal plane's coordinates, and I'm very concerned that they could open another passageway elsewhere. That is indeed a problem, but it shouldn't be that simple for them. After all, they were only able to open this abyssal passageway with the help of the Blood River Godslayer array, and at the very least, I would think that the Holy Spirit cult currently doesn't possess the power to set up another one of those arrays. What we should be doing now is increasing the intensity of the crackdown of evil soul masters on the continent. As soon as one is discovered, they have to be killed right away. We can't give them any chances to rise from the ashes again. Jiang Wenyun said. All of the military officials in the room nodded in agreement. The Blood River Godslayer array had left an extremely bitter taste in everyone's mouths, even setting aside the fact that over 10 million lives had been taken to create it. Just the losses suffered by the Western Legion alone were already extremely heavy. Guanzi said, I agree that we should set up more defensive lines as a precautionary measure. We definitely can't afford to grow complacent just because the enemy has temporarily retreated. We'll all submit a joint request to the federal government to send more resources here. Everyone else nodded in agreement once again. Fierce Wolf Douluo Dongxian was currently seated at the end position. Even though he had been stripped of his position as Legion commander, he was still undertaking the duties of the commander position. After all, he had led the Western Legion for so many years already, and the troops of the Western Legion only followed his orders. Did Sect Master Tango back already? Guanzi asked. Cao Daja replied, no, he told me that he's currently in seclusion. He must have gleaned something from the recently concluded battle. That's good to hear. Thank heavens the personnel from Shrek Academy and the Tang Sect were present on the northern front. Otherwise, we would have been in big trouble, Guanzi said. No one was in disagreement with this statement. Setting aside everything else, the Tang Sect's willingness to bring out Eternal Heaven to destroy the Blood River Godslayer array was a clear display of selflessness and nobility. The vast majority of people were under the impression that Eternal Heaven could only be used once. Only Chen Xinji and Guanzi knew that there was potential for the Tang Sect to use it again in the future. As a result of this knowledge, they were both treating Cao Daja with an extra modicum of respect. The Spirit Pagoda representative present was Gu Yuna, and she hadn't said anything this entire time. Guanzi cleared his throat and declared, if no one else has any suggestions or issues to raise, then let's end the meeting here. I'll submit the request for more resources to the federal government as soon as possible. Please wait, I have something to say. Gu Yuna suddenly broke her silence, and everyone immediately turned their attention to her. All of the military's top brass were very much in approval of this new Spirit Pagoda chairwoman. Setting aside everything else, her extraordinary feat in keeping the Spirit Sovereign at bay on her own had left everyone with a deep impression of her. The Spirit Sovereign was currently the most powerful abyssal creature to have appeared, yet Gu Yuna had been able to match his divine origin realm spiritual power, and that was astonishing to everyone. Furthermore, it was important to remember that she was still in her 20s, and she was surely destined for great things. Back when she had defeated Tang Wulin at the Joust for a Spouse event, many people hadn't taken that outcome very seriously as they were of the opinion that Tang Wulin had most likely intentionally lost that battle. However, only after the clash with the abyssal plane were they made aware of just how powerful the Silver Dragon Princess was. She was so young, yet she was already a limit Douluo with divine origin realm spiritual power. Her future was truly limitless. It could be said that she and Tang Wulin were the two brightest stars of the younger generation, and this was why she hadn't encountered any resistance in her inheritance of the chairwoman position. Only under her leadership did the Spirit Pagoda have a chance of making a resurgence. Please go ahead, Chairwoman Gu, Guanzi prompted. Gu Yuna slowly closed her eyes and said in a placid voice, the enemy hasn't left, and they'll be back very soon, so prepare for battle at all times. The tone of her voice was very confident, as if she was stating a fact rather than a guess. Everyone was quite surprised to hear this, and Guanzi's brows furrowed slightly as he asked, on what basis are you making this claim, Chairwoman Gu? Where is the enemy? Gu Yuna reopened her eyes and gave Guanzi a profound look. I can sense that neither the abyssal plane nor the Holy Spirit cult has truly departed. I don't know where they are, but I'm sure they'll return very soon. They won't allow the Blood God Array to be completed, so prepare for battle. Don't try to spread fear and panic without any evidence. Dongxian harumphed coldly in an angry manner. He had been completely screwed over by the Spirit Pagoda. If he hadn't heeded Kyangi Dawnfang's advice, he wouldn't have ended up in this situation. Thus, his temper immediately flared up hearing what seemed to be a baseless claim from Gu Yuna. Gu Yuna took a glance at him, and for some reason, Dongxian felt as if he had been electrocuted as their eyes met. His aura was completely repressed, and this naturally hadn't escaped the attention of everyone else present. There was no shortage of limit Douluo among these generals and admirals. With the advancement of soul technology and better understanding of the human body, modern limit Douluos were far more powerful than their counterparts of the ancient past. However, in the instant that Gu Yuna had released her spiritual power, all of them felt a chill run down their spine, including even the quasi-god level Chen Xinji. Chapter 1832, Wu Lin and Xiaowu. What incredible power! Gu Yuna lowered her gaze and said, I'm only telling you what I'm feeling. It's up to you whether you choose to believe me or not. After that, she turned and departed. Compared with Kyangi Dawnfang, her style and demeanor were completely different. Guanzi turned to Chen Xinji with an inquisitive expression, to which Chen Xinji said, it's always better to be safe than sorry, so let's prepare for battle. If the enemies don't turn up, great, but if they do, we have to be ready. Guanzi nodded in response. All right, I'll issue the relevant orders. Right at this moment, an alarm suddenly rang out across the entire control center without any warning. All of the generals and admirals were already rather tightly wound, and their expressions immediately changed slightly upon hearing the alarm. Had the enemies really returned? 6 hours flew by a flash, and Tang Wulin's aura had undergone some further minute changes. As he rose to his feet, a faint smile appeared on his face, and he murmured to himself, the evil spirit Orca King's leg bones really are extremely evil and aggressive in nature. It's a pity that they came up against my Golden Dragon King bloodline. They stood no chance in the end. He looked down at his own 2 legs, and a pleased look appeared on his face. Right at this moment, the authoritative voice rang out once again. The 8th trial of the Sea God. Challenge to inherit the Sea God's God seat. Challenge to inherit the Sea God's God seat. Tang Wulin faltered slightly upon hearing this. What was that supposed to mean? How was he supposed to challenge for the God seat? However, the voice offered no further explanation. Immediately thereafter, the surrounding area began to transform, and the entire space warped blurred, following which Tang Wulin found himself in a spacious golden hall. The hall wasn't particularly well lit, but everything inside was glowing with golden light. The ceiling was over 100 meters above his head, and it was an extremely majestic building that was surrounded by a series of massive pillars that looked as if they stood directly between heaven and earth. As soon as Tang Wulin arrived in the hall, he was struck by a strong sense of nostalgia. He recognized this hall. Of course he did. It seemed to have become larger than before, but its aura remained the same. This was the hall where he had learned from old Tang. It was old Tang's teachings that had sped up his development, and at the time, he had been oblivious to the fact that old Tang had been manifested from a wisp of his father's soul. All of a sudden, Tang Wulin's eyes widened as something dawned on him. Could it be that he was supposed to challenge? Right as this thought began to appear in his mind, a figure slowly emerged up ahead not far away from him. This was a tall and handsome figure with a head of long blue hair, and he seemed to be one with everything around him. He was wearing a set of tight-fitting robes that perfectly accentuated his figure, and even though his eyes were closed, he was giving off an ethereal aura, as if he were one with the very heavens. Tang Wulin was rooted to the spot upon seeing this, and immediately thereafter, his skin began to crawl as if all of the pores all over his entire body had opened up at once. An indescribable sense of emotion welled up in his heart, and he couldn't help but yell, "Father!" That's right, the man standing before him was none other than sea god Tang San. To put it more accurately, this seemed to be Tang San before he ascended to godhood, as he didn't possess a godly aura. A warm smile appeared on Tang San's face, and he sighed. "My son, I've been looking forward to this meeting, as the fact that you're here means that you've earned the right to undergo the 8th trial of the sea god. I'm very glad to see that you've grown up so splendidly." Tang Wulin's heart jolted slightly upon hearing this, as he instantly realized that this was the voice that had been left in the sea god's trident back since his father had first left it to him. Prior to commencing the 8th trial, there's something that you need to know. I don't know when we'll be reunited, but I'm confident that that day will come. Perhaps it'll be very far away, but we will be reunited at some point. The look in Tang San's eyes became even gentler, and they seemed to be filled with countless emotions. Tears immediately began to well up in Tang Wulin's eyes upon hearing this. He was somehow able to feel the deep emotions that were imbued in his father's words. There was intense yearning, crippling guilt, and even more intense anticipation. He was separated from his parents from birth, but at the very least, he had foster parents to look after him during his childhood, and he had been oblivious to his true origins. But his parents had constantly been tormented by their separation. In that instant, Tang Wulin wanted nothing better than to set off the search for his parents right away. Of course, if he wanted to do that, he would have to ascend to godhood first. Tang San paused momentarily, seemingly to compose himself, and right at this moment, another figure appeared beside him. This figure was slightly shorter than Tang San, and Tang Wulin's breath was immediately snatched away by the side of her. This was a fair and elegant figure in a pink dress, and her large and exuberant eyes were already brimming with tears. Her long hair was arranged into a single braid that trailed almost down to the floor, and her entire body was trembling slightly. She was so beautiful and full of vitality, but the pallor of her face was clearly slightly pale and unhealthy. Lin Lin. She let loose a heartbroken cry and rushed toward him with her arms spread open. Tang Wulin was unable to hold back the tears any longer as the floodgates sprang open, and he rushed toward the figure as quickly as he could. There was no need for any explanation or introduction. He immediately knew who she was at first sight. Mother. He tried to embrace the figure, and even though he couldn't sense a physical body, he could feel a faint sense of warmth that seemed to be melting his entire body. This was his birth mother, the wife of Tang San, one of the first generation of Shrek's 7 monsters, soft-boned Douluo Xiaowu. As a 100,000-year-old soul beast who had reincarnated herself as a human, she had shared a legendary love story with his father, and they had both ascended to godhood together. Upon learning that he was Tang San's son, Tang Wulin had envisioned his mother's appearance countless times. Even though this Xiaowu was different from what he had envisioned, in that instant, he could feel with unwavering conviction that this was his mother, his birth mother. This was a sense of bloodline connection that was beyond doubt in question. His mother was even more beautiful and gentle than he had imagined. She was so perfect, and her voice completely melted his heart. Both of them were sobbing uncontrollably. While recording this footage, she was unable to see her son, so she was even more emotional than he was. This was her and Tang San's son. They had been separated as soon as he was born, and she didn't even get a chance to breastfeed him once. How she wished that she could have been by her son's side and watched him grow day by day. Chapter 1833. You have to take care. However, she could only communicate with her son through this projection, and it was a very bittersweet experience for her. Tang San stood off to the side as he appraised his wife in silence. In this recording, he was also unable to see his son, and his eyes were filled with worry and a hint of concern. He gently rubbed his wife's back to try and soothe her emotions, but Xiaowu was completely unable to rein her current emotions. Tang Wulin was also completely immersed in his own emotional fluctuations, and his yearning to see his parents had reached an extreme peak. After a long while, Xiaowu's sobs faded into sniffles, and she said, "I'm so sorry, Lin Lin. I wasn't able to protect you or stay by your side. I miss you more than you can imagine. I want to return to your side right away, to hug you, to kiss you, to caress you. I want to be together with you and never separate ever again." Xiaowu's tears overflowed once again, and she was unable to go on. "Mother." Tang Wulin was also unable to form a coherent sentence through his tears. Tears also began to well up in Tang San's eyes, and he turned his head slightly to the side as he gently embraced Xiaowu, using the warmth of his body to assuage her sorrow. Only after a long while was Xiaowu just barely able to control her own emotions, and she sighed. "Lin Lin, you have to take care. I wish nothing more than for you to be happy and healthy. Also, you have to work hard on your cultivation and strive to attain godhood as soon as possible. Only then will you be able to live until we return. Once we come back, our family will be reunited. Your father says that the Golden Dragon King bloodline will extend your lifespan for a very, very long time, but the Golden Dragon King's power is deranged and destructive. You must guard your heart from the Golden Dragon King's insanity at all times. You've never been an orphan, you have us, and we'll always be protecting you from where we are. Even though I'm not by your side, I can feel it when you're happy, so you have to be happy every day. I've fallen ill because I miss you so much, but if you can be happy every day, I'll be able to sense your happiness and get better. My son, I love you so very much. Wait for me. I'll be sure to come back for you." Xiaowu made an embracing gesture once again as she spoke, wanting to hug her son, but as she did so, her face paled even further, and his body had been trembling this entire time. "I'll definitely be happy. Mother, don't be sick. You have to get better so we can have a happy reunion." Tang Wulin yelled with all his might, frantically trying to hold on to Xiaowu, but her projection was slowly fading away before his eyes. He could never forgive the look in her eyes the instant before she disappeared. They were filled with boundless yearning and concern. Tang San stood still on the spot, looking up into the sky to reverse the flow of his tears. Due to her constantly negative emotional state, Xiaowu's condition was constantly worsening, and he had recorded this footage to instill her with hope. Only after a long while did Tang Wulin and Tang San slowly recompose themselves. "Lin Lin, there's not much time left in this recording, so listen carefully to what I'm about to say next. It will be the key to whether our family can reunite," Tang San said. Tang Wulin raised his head to look at his father through teary eyes. Tang San continued, "The sea god's trident is a transcendent divine weapon, and even in the divine realm, it's an extremely powerful weapon that can rank alongside the Asura sword. The sea god is only a first-rank god, yet its god seat is just as powerful as a god king's, and the main contributing factor to that is the sea god's trident. I once also undertook the 9 trials of the sea god, and only enduring many hardships was I finally able to gain the acknowledgement of the sea god's trident. Hence, you must also undertake the 9 trials of the sea god. Even though the trials you undertake will be different from mine, I'm confident that you'll be able to pass the trials one after another and arrive here to meet me. The 8th trial was set up for you by me as the current sea god, and its name is Battle Between Father and Son. You'll be facing me in my most powerful form before I became the sea god, and only after defeating me will you attain the acknowledgement of the sea god's trident. There's another important reason why I left the sea god's trident with you. It's so that it can act as a set of coordinates for me to find you in the future. Hence, you must protect it, and it's extremely important that you truly gain its acknowledgement. According to the rules of the 9 trials of the sea god, each trial you complete will increase your affinity with the sea god's trident slightly, thereby allowing you to obtain more of its power. Once you complete all of the trials, you'll inherit the sea god's god seat and become the sea god. I once went through the very same experience, but unfortunately, I can't pass the god seat on to you as there is no longer any divine realm presiding over the Douluo continent, and I'm too far away to pass down my god seat through the sea god's trident. Hence, all I can do is weaken my brand on the sea god's trident so that you'll also be able to use it and obtain its power. Hence, after you complete the 9 trials of the sea god, you'll be able to master this transcendent divine weapon, but you won't be able to use it to attain godhood. You'll have to become a god through your own effort and power. Even the planar ruler of the Douluo continent won't be able to help you achieve this, but I'm confident that my son will forge his own path. Also, as your mother just said, your Golden Dragon King bloodline will infinitely extend your lifespan, so you won't have to worry about age even if you don't attain godhood. Hence, do not force yourself and recklessly attempt to make a breakthrough to godhood until you're ready. Absolutely do not touch the final 2 seals before you become a god. Otherwise, there's a very high chance that the Golden Dragon King will develop bow your will. Back when I slew the Golden Dragon King, it injected all of its essence into your body both to get back at me, and to give itself a chance at reincarnation through you. If the final two seals are broken before you attain godhood, there's a very good chance it'll possess you, and that'll be a very tragic fate for you. So do not let it happen. Make sure to practice the unpredictable storm that I passed on to you until it's second nature to you. It'll assist you greatly in your times of need. Do not fear in the face of any enemy. Trust me when I say that I will always be by your side. My son, you must become stronger. Only then will you be able to hold out longer and last until our reunion. All right, brace yourself now. You are about to face me in my most powerful pre-god form. Only by defeating me will you gain the acknowledgement of the sea god's trident. Do your best. I'm confident that you'll succeed. Tang San's message concluded here, and he continued to look in Tang Wulin's direction with a warm smile. Through the words of his father, Tang Wulin was able to sense many things. Chapter 1834, Battle between father and son. His father had done so much for him and paved the way for his development. Furthermore, he could see some other things through his father's eyes. It seemed that there was something else protecting him aside from the sea god's trident and the 3 instances where his father would intervene in his time of need. He hadn't stated what this was, but Tang Wulin could clearly sense this through his expression and his words. A father's love was deeper and more reserved. He wouldn't always talk about how much he missed his son like Xiaowei did, but that didn't mean that he loved his son any less. Tang Wulin took a deep breath to compose himself, and a determined look appeared in his eyes. Rest assured, father, I'll be sure to defeat you and gain the acknowledgement of the sea god's trident. I'm your son, the son of sea god Tang San, and I'll be even better than you were. I'll do everything in my power to find you, and we'll definitely reunite sooner rather than later. After that, Tang Wulin raised his right hand, and a burst of golden light appeared on his palm before extending outward in either direction, following which the golden dragon spear emerged in his grasp. Upon summoning the golden dragon spear, Tang Wulin's aura began to elevate and become more aggressive. He had to defeat his own father. Only then would he be a step closer to finding them. He didn't cry any longer as he clearly recalled what his mother had just said. Only when he was happy was his mother happy. So he was going to work hard to make himself happy. In doing so, he would contribute to his mother's recovery, and once they reunited, he would be meeting a happy and healthy mother rather than one who was sick and frail. A faint smile appeared on Tang San's face, and it was as if he had sensed the change in Tang Wulin's aura. Are you ready, my son? I'm ready. Tang Wulin replied in a determined voice. Tang San gave him a firm nod, then raised his right hand, and the sea god's trident appeared in his grasp amid a flash of golden light. It was still the same transcendent divine weapon, but it struck Tang Wulin with a completely different feeling seeing it in Tang San's grasp. In the instant that it appeared, it was as if it had already fused as one with Tang San, and Tang Wulin felt as if he were facing a boundless and bottomless ocean rather than a person. Tang San appraised his son with a pair of unfathomable blue eyes, and the sound of crushing waves rang out from all directions. A series of soul rings emerged from beneath his feet, and the first 8 were all red, but the final one was a peculiar bright golden soul ring. This was the first time that Tang Wulin had ever seen a soul ring of this color, and thinking back to the legends surrounding his father, he immediately exclaimed, "Is that a 1 million-year-old soul ring?" According to legends, his father had defeated the 1 million-year-old deep-sea demonic whale king, which was the same opponent who had retreated without engaging in battle with Tang Wulin. In the end, Tang San had obtained this 1 million-year-old soul ring, thereby forging a foundation for his eventual ascension to godhood. Aside from the fact that he still hadn't inherited the god seat, this was already Tang San in his most powerful form. An indescribable sense of pride welled up in Tang Wulin's heart. Just the fact that he was able to challenge his father in his most powerful human form was something to be proud of. Ever since the Tang sect's founding, his father had been a legend across the entire Douluo continent, regardless of whether it was in the distant past or now. The glory of sea god Tang San was something that no one was able to surpass. The 2 most prosperous years on the Douluo continent came when his father founded the Tang sect, and when Spirit Ice Douluo Huo Yuao founded the Spirit Pagoda. However, even though it was said that Huo Yuao had also attained godhood, there were very few people who were able to prove that this was true, and there were no records of god tier battles that Huo Yao had been involved in. In contrast, his father's era was one where the Spirit Hall had reigned supreme. In the end, Tang San and Xiaowei faced the twin gods, defeating the mother and daughter duo of Bibi Dong and Chen Ringshu, thereby forging an undying legend and allowing the Soul Master world to escape from the oppressive hold of the Spirit Hall. It could be said that Tang San was an absolute legend, and even his generation of Shrek's 7 monsters were all said to have attained godhood as well. There was no one in the Soul Master world more renowned than Tang San, and it was a massive honor to be able to challenge Tang San in his most powerful pre-god form. With that in mind, Tang Wulin's blood began to churn. He didn't need to prove anything by defeating his father. All he wanted to was to tell his father through his power that he had already grown up, and that he hadn't put his father to shame. He knew that his father may not be able to experience all of this, but he was still going to try his best. He raised his golden dragon spear, and in that instant, it was as if the spear had become as heavy as a mountain. His aura surged forth like a volcanic eruption, forming a streak of scintillating golden light that rose straight up into the heavens. His scorching blood essence fluctuations erupted forth, alongside his unyielding will and intent to wage battle against heaven and earth. Having fused with his father's bloodline and reached the divine origin realm, Tang Wulin's dragon emperor fight clearly affected even Tang San, and a moment of disorientation appeared in the latter's eyes. Now, without any further preparation, Tang Wulin's spiritual power instantly caught on to his father's momentary stupor, and he shot forth directly toward him as a streak of golden light. He raised his golden dragon spear and forged ahead in the most simple and direct, yet most domineering fashion. Restrict mediocrity, Dragon Emperor charge. In that instant, a thunderous dragon's roar rang out, drowning out the sound of crushing waves in the surrounding area. Dragon Emperor fight and Dragon Emperor charge was the ultimate combination that Tang Wulin had used to defeat Kaian Yudong Feng, but on this occasion, he was already far more powerful than he had been back then. Even if he were facing a quasi-god, Tang Wulin was confident that this combination would pose a significant threat to them. In the face of Tang Wulin's attack, Tang San slowly took a half step backward. That's right, the half step had been taken in a very slow and deliberate fashion. At the very least, that was what it seemed like to Tang Wulin. However, just that half backward step alone struck him with a clear feeling that the pressure his Dragon Emperor fight was exerting on his father was being affected. In that instant, it was as if his Dragon Emperor fight had wavered slightly. In the next instant, Tang San swept his sea god's trident horizontally through the air, sweeping it into the tip of the golden dragon spear. A crisp clang rang out, and just that sound alone seemed to be capable of destroying everything in the surrounding area. In that instant, Tang Wulin's aura underwent a change. He discovered that his golden dragon spear seemed to have let loose an anguished wail as soon as it was struck by the sea god's trident. Tang Wulin had absolute confidence in his own strength as he had never been bested in this area by another soul master of the same cultivation rank. Not even Arahang had been able to surpass him in this respect. Thus, it never occurred to him that his father could be stronger than him. After all, both of them were still human at this point. However, in that instant, he well and truly experienced the difference between a divine weapon and a transcendent divine weapon. He felt as if it wasn't the sea god's trident that had struck his golden dragon spear, but the entire ocean instead. The unrivaled force behind the attack struck him with a sense of powerlessness. Chapter 1835, Battle between father and son. This was an extremely impactful feeling, to the point where he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His Dragon Emperor charge was diverted to the side completely out of control, causing him to stumble to the side and leaving him completely open to attacks. Even though it was only a brief clash, it showed Tang Wulin many things. The first thing that he felt was the gap between himself and his father. The disparity didn't lie so much in power, but more so in their bodily control. He had thought that he was already quite exceptional in this aspect, but at its core, he was still controlling his own body, while his father was giving off a feeling that could only be described by the term return to simplicity. From his backward step to his sweep of the sea god's trident, everything was extremely smooth and simple, not flashy nor extravagant in the slightest, yet it had broken his 2 most powerful Dragon Emperor restriction techniques. After forcing back Tang Wulin, the sea god's trident also faltered slightly, but Tang San didn't remain still. He raised his left foot, and a streak of red light came slashing directly toward Tang Wulin. He was using the very same evil spirit orca king leg bone that Tang Wulin had absorbed not long ago to attack him. Not only that, but Tang San was also making a grabbing motion toward him with his left hand, and a giant azure claw appeared out of thin air, reaching down toward Tang Wuling from above, while the red blade of light surged toward him from below. The transition between the two attacks was extremely fast, and Tang Wuling was naturally unaware of the fact that Tang San's grab was an attack known as the Sky Azure Sluggishness Divine Claw, unleashed using the Sky Azure Ball Python's right army bone. This was an extremely powerful control system ability. It had always been the case for Tang Wuling that the more powerful his opponent was, the more his latent potential would be stimulated. Facing his father in this battle, he was struck by an unprecedented sense of excitement, which spurred him on to unleash a counterattack without any hesitation. The Golden Dragon Annihilation Claws instantly vanished from his grasp, and he also made a grabbing motion with his right hand, but what he unleashed was a giant golden claw. This was his Golden Dragon Annihilation Claw. This was a powerful attacking ability developed with the Dust Gold Red Claw Bear's right hand bone as a foundation, and the two claws clashed amid a sharp screeching sound. The Sky Azure Sluggishness Divine Claw was torn apart, and what remained of the Golden Dragon Annihilation Claw slashed directly toward Tang San. However, streaks of azure light suddenly appeared around Tang Wuling, causing him to become very slow and sluggish. As for the oncoming red blade of light, that was nullified by the same attack that Tang Wuling unleashed from his own evil spirit Orca King Legbone. Tang San drew a circle with the tip of his golden trident to dispel the Golden Dragon Annihilation Claw, while a vast expanse of rainbow lightning erupted out of Tang Wuling's body to rid himself of the effect of the Sky Azure Sluggishness Divine Claw. Neither side was able to gain the upper hand from that clash. In the next instant, Tang Wuling seized the initiative. The air around him suddenly seemed to have become more viscous, and an earth-shattering roar erupted out of his mouth. This was his Golden Dragon Roar. A giant golden dragon head appeared, letting loose a thunderous roar that was imbued with his divine origin realm spiritual power. The deafening roar turned everything in the surrounding area golden in color. Tang Wuling was well aware of his own abilities, and he knew that there was still some disparity between his father and himself when it came to power. In this form, his father had to have already reached the quasi-god level, and he would have certainly been the most powerful quasi-god of his era by far. However, his father wasn't necessarily superior to him when it came to spiritual power. After all, it was only by chance that his spiritual power had reached the divine origin realm, and this was why he had decided to unleash this sound wave attack that was infused with his spiritual power. The Golden Dragon Roar completely drowned out the sound of the sea, and Tang San's expression instantly stiffened as his mind went completely blank. Tang Wuling took advantage of this opportunity to strike as he summoned his Golden Blood Dragon domain while releasing his suit of four-word battle armor. In his eyes, his four-word battle armor was definitely his biggest advantage. After all, battle armor didn't even exist during his father's era. With the assistance of his Golden Dragon Roar, he was able to unleash his most powerful attack. His four-word battle armor instantly enhanced his aura and powers drastically, and he raised his left hand, following which a black hole instantly appeared at the center of his palm, exerting almighty suction force. This was his Dragon Emperor break. Regardless of what his father did to retaliate, he was confident that he would be able to repress his father's power using his Dragon Emperor break. Furthermore, Tang San was already at a disadvantage from the lingering effects of the Golden Dragon Roar. At the same time, Tang Wuling clenched his right hand into a fist, and golden scales appeared all over his hand as he unleashed an almighty punch. Heaven and earth was instantly tipped on its head, and the sun and moon became devoid of luster. Restrict the universe. Dragon Emperor Annihilation. Tang Wuling knew that there was no way he could compare with his father when it came to battle experience. Even though this was Tang San in his pre-god form, he still had 20,000 years worth of battle experience. Thus, he had decided to end this battle in the shortest amount of time possible. Only then would he be able to create a chance for victory through his formidable explosiveness. Thus, he had unleashed Dragon Emperor break in conjunction with Dragon Emperor Annihilation, enhanced by his four-word battle armor. This was the most powerful attack he was currently capable of unleashing. An incredibly powerful aura instantly erupted forth, and while unleashing his Dragon Emperor break and Dragon Emperor Annihilation, Tang Wuling was utilizing controlling crane capturing dragon as well, thereby further boosting the power and devouring force of his attack. In that instant, his utilization of the two Dragon Emperor restriction techniques struck him with a sense of enlightenment, and his control over his Dragon Emperor restriction techniques had clearly been elevated to another level. Almost as soon as Dragon Emperor Annihilation was unleashed, Tang San returned to his senses. Yet at this point, he was already being drawn toward Tang Wuling by Dragon Emperor break. Despite how heavy his golden trident was, it was unable to hold him in place, and he felt as if he had sunk into a swamp-like vortex. However, right at this moment, a smile appeared on his face. That's right, it was a smile. In the next instant, Tang Wuling's entire body tightened, and countless bluish golden vines that were only as thick as a human finger spread over his entire body to bind him tightly. The vines were instantly destroyed by the eruption of Dragon Emperor Annihilation, but they still caused him to falter momentarily. Where had these vines come from? The vines had appeared directly on his body, so his Dragon Emperor Annihilation hadn't been able to keep them out. At the same time, Tang San took advantage of his slight pause to conjure up a series of golden halos with his sea god's trident. Each and every one of those halos seemed to contain a small world, and they were nullifying the devouring force, dispelling the annihilation. Tang Wuling couldn't help but be mesmerized by this sight. His father was supposed to be the one influenced by his Golden Dragon Roar, but it was him instead who was entranced by the golden halos, despite his divine origin realm spiritual power. This was Unpredictable Storm. He had always known that Unpredictable Storm was very powerful. Tang San had used this technique both times he had stepped in to save Tang Wuling, and he had just reinforced to Tang Wuling just how important this technique was. However, only when truly facing Unpredictable Storm did Tang Wuling truly come to understand exactly what it was. Chapter 1836. Let's go again. The Unpredictable Storm being unleashed wasn't even of the divine caliber, but it was enough to strip away his Dragon Emperor break and Dragon Emperor Annihilation little by little. Those flimsy golden halos were able to dispel his most powerful attack with ease, then continued on toward his body. He definitely couldn't allow himself to be encircled by Unpredictable Storm. Otherwise, it would be all over. With that in mind, golden light flashed in Tang Wuling's hand, and his golden dragon spear appeared in his grasp as he also unleashed a series of golden halos of his own. He was opposing Unpredictable Storm with Unpredictable Storm. This was the only countermeasure he could think of. The golden halos came into contact with one another, and something very peculiar happened. To Tang Wuling's astonishment, as his Unpredictable Storm clashed with that of his father, the latter trembled slightly, then devoured the golden halos of his Unpredictable Storm one after another. His eyes widened with shock upon seeing this, and in the next instant, the oncoming golden halos had cut off all avenues of evasion for him before encircling his body. Regardless of which golden dragon King Soul skill he used to try and break free, it was all to no avail. The golden trident rested itself on his chest, and in the face of its mountainous weight, all of his reactions were completely dulled. A sense of dejection instantly spread through his entire body, and he looked up at his father with a defeated expression. I lost. He had already anticipated that his father would be extremely powerful, but only after truly sparring with his father did he understand just how much of a disparity there was between them. He was already close to the quasi-god level, so there shouldn't have been that much of a gap in power. But throughout this entire battle, everything seemed to have been so easy for Tang San. Even in the face of his Dragon Emperor break and Dragon Emperor Annihilation, Tang San only had to scramble slightly, but in the end, he was still able to defend against the attack with ease. The blue-silver Emperor vines that had suddenly grown out of his body, the Unpredictable Storm that had been unleashed with perfect timing, all of it seemed to have been planned out in advance. It was as if this battle had been a game of chess, yet his father already had a winning position on the board from the very beginning. This feeling of completely being controlled and neutralized in battle was something that Tang Wuling was experiencing only for the first time. In his mind, this reflected a fundamental difference in their levels. Tang San turned to his dejected son with a faint smile and withdrew his sea god's trident, upon which the golden halos around Tang Wuling also vanished. Tang Wuling turned to his father and was just about to say something when Tang San declared, "Let's go again." Again. Tang Wuling faltered slightly upon hearing this. He had thought that this defeat would have equated to a failure to complete the 8th trial, but it seems that this wasn't the case. It immediately occurred to him that this 8th trial was an opportunity for him, during which his father would provide guidance to him in person. It was just like what old Tang had done for him in the past, except the current old Tang had become his opponent and was helping him to improve through battle. All right. Tang Wuling nodded firmly as he took a deep breath to compose him. A fierce look appeared in his eyes as he appraised his father, and in the next instant, he lashed out once again. Countless spear projections erupted out of his golden dragon spear, surging directly toward Tang San, and his golden dragon king bloodline rose up once again. His spear intent instantly reached the spear essence level, and this attack was none other than his fury of the masses. This was not just fury of the masses of the spear essence level, it was also enhanced by his divine origin realm spiritual power. Tang San extended his sea god's trident forward, and he also unleashed fury of the masses to oppose Tang Wulin's attack. Clashes and sharp piercing sounds rang out incessantly in the air. In terms of pure strength, Tang Wulin held a slight advantage over his father, but Tang San was still able to gain the upper hand due to his advantage in possessing a superior weapon. However, following the previous clash, Tang Wulin had already completely entered a battle-ready state. He was constantly accurately adjusting his golden dragon spear to create small tremors. The previous clash had already clearly displayed to him that simply attacking a powerful being of his father's caliber with his most powerful attacks was completely futile. What he had to do was find better opportunities to gradually pile on the pressure. Unpredictable storm was like an impossibly heavy mountain weighing down on his heart, but he was confident that if he wanted to gain a deeper understanding of unpredictable storm, he would first have to develop a clearer sense of his own abilities, as well as those of his father. It seemed that his golden dragon spear had slowed down, but this was simply a result of the fact that Tang Wulin was being far more meticulous with his strikes, and his blows were always able to appear in the most annoying places for Tang San. At this moment, Tang San was like an immovable mountain that was able to easily defend against any attack regardless of which direction it came from. It was as if there were no holes in his defense at all. Meanwhile, Tang Wulin's attacks were like bolts of lightning striking down from the heavens, attempting to leave a mark on this daunting mountain. This was definitely a spectacular clash. The golden dragon spear seemed to have already fused as one with Tang Wulin's body, and he was constantly combining his golden dragon king abilities and soul skills to unleash more powerful attacks that came in unrelenting waves, each of which was more powerful than the previous one. Meanwhile, Tang San merely stood still on the spot and allowed him to attack, holding himself steady like an immovable rock formation amid a sea of violence. This was a devastating battle with thunderous dragons' roars and crashing waves ringing out incessantly. The two of them had become completely engrossed in the clash, and everything else faded out of their attention. On the boundless sea, there was a tightly packed formation of massive ships. As the three most powerful naval legions of the Federation, the Sea God Legion, East Sea Legion, and North Sea Legion had set up an impenetrable defensive line on the Arctic Ocean. All types of surveillance soul tools had been plunged deep into the sea, and they would even detect the passing of the tiniest of fish or prawn. Furthermore, the deep sea energy detection devices also being employed were the most accurate and sensitive that the Federation currently had to offer. The flagship of the Sea God Legion, the Sea God Mothership, was currently slowly patrolling the waters. Among this huge congregation of ships, it was like the king leading its people. All those working on the Sea God, even just the ordinary soldiers, were filled with a sense of pride. This was the pinnacle of the Federal Navy, and for those who had served on the Sea God, that experience often turned out to be the highest honor they ever achieved. The massive Sea God was like a giant beast, and it weighed over 80,000 tons. It was truly a behemoth of the ocean. No waves or winds could cause any substantial harm to it, and almost all types of weapons were fitted on the Sea God, as well as its very own radar reconnaissance system and detection equipment of all descriptions that could directly connect with satellites. It could be said that all of the Federation's most cutting-edge technology could be found on the Sea God. Those serving on the Sea God often said that just this single ship alone could crush the navies of the Douluo Empire and Dou Spirit Empire, and this was definitely no exaggeration. This giant mothership was armed to the teeth, and it had always been overseen by Chen Xinji. This position of captain on the ship was only vacated after his sudden resignation, and that was an indication of how highly he regarded this role. Chapter 1837, The Sea God Legion's Crisis. The current captain of the Sea God was the current commander of the Sea God Legion. Not only was he someone whom Chen Xinji had groomed to be his successor, there was a deeper connection between them in the form of their familial ties. Chen Zai wore a pair of admiral epaulets on his shoulders, and he had received them not long ago after inheriting the position of Sea God Legion commander. Chen Zai was already over 60 years of age, and after becoming the Sea God Legion commander, he finally felt like he had stepped out of his father's shadow. He had been in the military for several decades already, and during this time, he had worked diligently, starting from a private and climbing all the way to the admiral rank through his own efforts. Prior to becoming a rear admiral, no one was even aware of the fact that he was Chen Xinji's son. He had earned everything for himself, and during his military career, Chen Xinji had only provided him with some guidance in cultivation, but never used their relationship to secure promotions for him. It was Chen Zai himself who had chosen the military path, and in his heart, his father had always been his idol. However, only after he became a rear admiral through his own hard work did he truly come to understand just how massive his father's influence in the military was. As soon as Chen Xinji transferred him to the Sea God Legion and declared to everyone that he was his son, Chen Zai had immediately had a label placed on him. All of his past efforts seemed to have become pointless because whenever someone mentioned him, they would always begin by talking about how he was the boundless ocean Douluo's son, and he had heard far too many compliments along the lines of as expected of the boundless ocean Douluo's son. He had been young and hot-blooded once, and he had confronted Chen Xinji over this. In response, Chen Xinji gave a very simple answer: if you want to step out of my shadow, then you have to surpass me. If you can't do that, then you don't have the right to inherit my position. In order to earn this right, Chen Zai had shed countless blood, sweat, and tears. He had always been working as hard as he could to surpass his father, but unfortunately, he was limited by his aptitude in the end. Thus, even though he had been in the Sea God Legion for over 20 years, he only managed to reach the vice admiral rank. The Sea God Legion commander had always been his father, and all of the Legion's troops were absolutely loyal to Chen Xinji. Of course, they were also very respectful toward Chen Zai, but he knew that this respect had been earned for him by his father. By the time Chen Zai finally became a hyper Douluo, it dawned on him that there was most likely no way he would be able to surpass his father in his lifetime. His father simply stood far too high for him to reach. He was a quasi-god. How was he supposed to ever surpass that level? At the time, he had been completely defeated and even thought about giving up. However, right at this moment, his father apparently made a grave error, and as a result, he had resigned as the Sea God Legion commander and Battle God Hallmaster with immediate effect. Thus, before Chen Zai had even had sufficient time to process what was going on, he was promoted to the position of Sea God Legion commander, and he was also finally raised to the admiral rank. All of this still felt like a dream to him. Prior to Chen Xinji's departure, he had met with Chen Zai and told him that from that moment forth, he was the leader of the Chen family, and that he would have to make all of the decisions in the future and take responsibility for them. Chen Zai really wanted to ask more questions. He didn't feel like he was ready, even though he had been looking forward to this day for such a long time. However, when this day finally arrived, he was left feeling slightly panicked and stressed. Chen Xinji hadn't stuck around to answer any of his questions. After that brief statement, he simply departed, and he didn't even tell his son where he was going. Chen Zai's mother had already passed away, and he had always known that their relationship hadn't been a very strong one. He had also heard some rumors here and there, but only after learning that his father really had gone to Shrek Academy did he come to understand that the rumors were true. However, he didn't care about all of that. He was now the leader of the Chen family. His father was already over 100 years of age, so regardless of what decision he made, he had already given his entire life for his family and the military. Now that this responsibility had been passed down to him, it was his duty to carry it. As for his father, he could do whatever he wanted as long as he was happy. At the commencement of the battle against the Abyssal Plain, his father had returned and was immediately made one of the main commanders. In that instant, Chen Xinji was struck by a crushing sense of defeat once again. Following his father's return, all of the high-ranking officials in the Legion came to ask him when the old commander was going to return, and when he was going to take over control of the Sea God Legion again. Just as he was sinking into self-loathing and feelings of inadequacy, he finally experienced the love of his father for the very first time. Chen Xinji made a visit to the Sea God Legion in person, but he did so solely to declare that he would never command the Sea God Legion again, and that Chen Zai was the one and only commander who had his full support. It was from that moment forth that Chen Zai felt for the first time that the high-ranking officials of the Sea God Legion were content to follow him, rather than constantly waiting for his father's return. As the battle unfolded, he experienced the suffocating pressure of the front lines, and this was the opportunity that he had always been waiting for. Finally, once all of the artillery fire ceased, the battle seemed to have concluded. Chen Zai could never forget the moment where he had ordered the Sea God Legion to open fire on all weapons. That was an indescribable sense of joy that one could perhaps only experience after rising to the top. At this moment, he was standing on the tallest watchtower of the Sea God, peering into the distance. The chilly wind would naturally fade before reaching him, and from a totally selfish perspective, he didn't even want this battle to end. As a soldier, there was no greater sense of existence than what could be derived from the battlefield. Unfortunately, according to the main control center's plan, only a portion of the Sea God Legion would remain following the completion of the Sea God array, while he would leave the Sea God and return to their original post. He was rather disappointed by this arrangement. arrangement. He hadn't even had a chance to put himself on full display yet, and the battle was already over. He didn't enjoy conflict, but he had a strong yearning to prove himself through battle. He withdrew his gaze and rose up into the air, then descended toward the bridge. He enjoyed watching the sea, but it was time for lunch. As he slowly descended, he controlled his soul power so that the air around him acted like a companion to slow his fall. Right at this moment, Chenzai suddenly felt a tremor run through the sea god below him. He faltered slightly upon sensing this, and his first thought was that perhaps it was just his imagination. How could an 80,000-ton ship possibly be swaying, particularly on such a calm and placid day? However, in the next instant, a piercing alarm had already rang out across the entire ship. This was an enemy attack. A sharp look instantly appeared in Chenzai's eyes, and he began to rise upward again. He quickly opened his military communicator. This is Chenzai. What is the situation? Why has the alarm been raised? Commander, we've suddenly been struck by an irregular wave, and at the same time, we discovered a massive creature approaching us from the north at a very high speed. Chenzai's heart jolted slightly upon hearing this, but he immediately issued an order. Enter the highest level of battle readiness right away, and inform the North Sea Legion and East Sea Legion that there's an enemy attack. He turned toward the sea god's control center as he spoke, and he knew that trouble was coming. Just as he landed and began to rush toward the control center, the sea god swayed violently once again. His expression instantly darkened upon sensing this. Having been on the sea god for so many years, he was extremely familiar with all of its statistics, and he knew that extremely powerful ocean currents were required to sway the ship. If these currents were being created by this creature, then just how fearsome was this thing? Chapter 1838. A whale? The ship swaying didn't affect him at all as he strode into the control center, where someone immediately offered up a report of the current situation. Change the image. I want to see the current situation under visual surveillance. Chenzai yelled. Visual surveillance wasn't actual footage. Instead, it was a collation of data gathered from all types of surveillance cell tool, and through this data, the approximate form, power level, and other information about the subject being surveyed could be modeled. This type of visual surveillance could help one analyze a faraway target so they could work out a strategy to counter the subject, and it was currently the Sea God Legion's most advanced method of reconnaissance. The image on the big screen quickly changed, and a massive stream of data flashed past, following which an image was presented. This was an image of a gigantic creature, and it was approaching at an astonishing speed. According to the data being displayed, this creature was currently moving at over 5 times the maximal speed that the Sea God was capable of reaching. This was a level of speed that virtually didn't exist in the sea, and what was even more terrifying was the sheer size of the creature. It was over a kilometer in length, and its overall mass wasn't inferior to that of the Sea God. Chenzai had been an excellent student, and he had memorized the data of the vast majority of powerful sea soul beast species, but nowhere in his memory could he find information about such a massive sea soul beast. Warships Heaven-Sea, Earth-Sea, Emperor-Sea, and Void-Sea, lock onto the target and fire 3 rounds of torpedoes. Chenzai commanded. Meanwhile, retreat the Sea God and advise the North Sea Legion and East Sea Legion to disperse and retreat to form a ring-shaped battle formation. His orders were quickly issued and immediately enacted. From a bird's eye perspective, hundreds of ships could be seen quickly spreading outward to form a giant semicircle with its opening facing the oncoming creature like a giant pocket. 3 rounds of torpedoes, which amounted to a total of 36, were launched directly toward the enormous figure as a probing attack. However, in the next instant, the massive ocean current was released by the creature, and the 36 torpedoes didn't even have a chance to evade before they all exploded in the sea. The seawater in the distance surged, and one pillar of water after another erupted into the heavens. Lock onto the target with all weapons and prepare the deep sea missiles. All mecha units, take flight and prepare to strike from the sky. Chenzai continued to issue orders with a dark expression. This was clearly a formidable enemy, but he had no idea what it was. Judging from the current simulated model, it seemed that this was an enormous fish, but what kind of fish would reach this size? It was simply unheard of. Surely even the legendary 1 million-year-old sea soul beasts wouldn't have been able to reach this size. The unknown creature is slowing down. It seems to be about to rise to the surface. A messenger soldier reported. Chenzai's eyes lit up upon hearing this, and he immediately ordered, bring up the satellite image. I want to see it as it rises up out of the water. Yes. The image on the big screen was quickly split up, with one side still displaying the visual surveillance model, while the other transformed into a satellite image of the sea. Sure enough, the gigantic creature was slowly rising up, and it was truly an astonishing sight to behold. The satellite image was locked onto the relevant area of the sea, waiting for the creature to emerge. Finally, a massive dark blue back slowly appeared, and in the next instant, a colossal pillar of water with a diameter in excess of 50 meters erupted into the sky, creating a rainbow as it did so. The pillar of water erupted upward for several kilometers before tumbling back down, creating a massive arc in the sky. The pillar of water then formed a gigantic ball of water that was over 500 meters in diameter with purplish black light shimmering within it. In the next instant, the ball of water was guided directly toward the sea god by the arc that had just been created. A piercing alarm rang out across the entire ship, and the power rating of the ball of water as determined by the energy detection equipment was rapidly rising. Fire the ground-to-air soul missiles and the sea god's main cannon to intercept the attack. Chenzai commanded. The Sea God Legion immediately reacted, and thousands of soul missiles and soul lasers instantly rose up into the air opposed the enormous ball of water. Boom! The ball of water exploded as soon as it was struck by the first attack, and as a result, many of the oncoming attacks missed it altogether. Right at this moment, the entire sky turned dark, and a sense of crushing pressure descended upon the 3 naval fleets. Massive dark clouds began to converge, and they seemed to have been formed by the dispersed ball of water. Immediately thereafter, what appeared to be a storm of purplish black rain fell from the heavens directly onto the 3 fleets. Only now did the satellite image appear on the big screen in the Sea God's control center, and it depicted a dark blue with a huge head and a relatively smaller tail. The creature's body was riddled with layer upon layer of sinister faces, and upon zooming in on the image, it was discovered that these faces were countless vengeful spirits. Near the top of the creature's head was a giant blowhole. Was this a whale? But what kind of whale could grow this big? A thought suddenly occurred to Chenzai, a thought of a legendary soul beast, the 1 million-year-old deep-sea demonic whale king. It was said that the founder of the Tang sect, Tang San, slew a 1 million-year-old deep-sea demonic whale king 20,000 years ago, making it his ninth soul ring. However, even if it really did exist, hadn't it already been killed by Tang San? Why had it appeared here? Furthermore, in the legends, the deep-sea demonic whale king was only several hundred meters in length. A strong sense of foreboding began to well up in Chenzai's heart. Activate all of the ship's protective barriers to their maximal capacity. A series of white protective barriers were quickly activated on all of the ships, and the formation of the 3 fleets also began to change. It was at a time like this when the qualities of 3 fleets were put on full display. Even though it had been a very long time since they had fought in a real battle, they had undergone many practical combat drills in preparation to instigate war against the other 2 continents. The larger the ship was, the further ahead their position would be, and the 3 motherships led from the very forefront with the warships on either side of them, while the smaller ships were quickly traveling toward the rear. The largest ships undoubtedly had the most powerful protective barriers, so they would be able to have the best nullifying effect on a large-scale attack like this one. Right as the 3 fleets began to change formation, the purplish black rain arrived, and in that instant, all of the soldiers in the 3 fleets felt as if they had been plunged straight into the depths of hell. Blood-curdling shrieks and terrifying roars of fury rang out, and even through the protective barriers, they could clearly see one vengeful spirit after another shrieking in a deranged manner. Some of the weaker soldiers were struck by symptoms of dizziness and nausea just from hearing these sounds, and ripples began to surge across all of the protective barriers, creating one halo after another. Piercing alarms rang out frequently on all of the ships, particularly the smaller ships that were still in motion. Commander, the protective barriers of our 3rd-grade gunboats won't be able to last much longer. According to our analysis, we are being attacked by corrosive miasma, and it's whittling down the energy of our protective barriers very quickly. The advisor hurriedly reported. Chapter 1839, Abyssal Eruption. Fire all of the secondary cannons, and primarily focus the cannon fire on the area above the medium and small ships. At the same time, all of the mega units will stay within the protective barriers and fire freely outward to alleviate pressure. After the order was issued, countless energy attacks were soon unleashed to nullify the purplish black rain falling from the sky. At the same time, a string of deafening booms rang out, and all large soul missiles of all descriptions were launched toward the enormous figure in the distance. However, after unleashing its attack, the gigantic whale suddenly sank into the water and quickly dived deep into the sea. The satellite quickly lost sight of it, but the other surveillance devices could detect that during the whale's descent, another powerful ocean current began to surge toward the 3 fleets, and the energy imbued within this current was so formidable that it was significantly disrupting the surveillance cell tools. As a result, the massive figure became very blurry and indistinct to Sea God Legion surveillance. Activate all surveillance cell tools to their maximal operating capacity and lock onto its location at all cost. Chen Zhou hurriedly yelled. If they couldn't track their opponent, then they would essentially be blind and deaf, and that would be extremely perilous. Right at this moment, the entire sea suddenly erupted into a frenzy. Violent ocean currents appeared, and massive waves that stretched to several dozens of meters tall were swept up. The entire sea had turned dark and forbidding, and it was as if all water elements, even the entire sea itself, had suddenly become enemies of the three naval fleets. All of the surveillance devices instantly malfunctioned, and in the face of the turbulent wave, some of the small ships were held clear out of the water. The three fleets were instantly plunged into a state of chaos, and explosions began to appear. Those explosions were from the small gunboats, which had self-detonated as their protective barriers were unable to keep out the corrosive rain. The power of soul beasts was limited as gods couldn't appear in this world, but the power of nature was limitless. Regardless of how powerful the three naval fleets were, they were still extremely insignificant in the face of nature's wrath. Chen Zhou's expression had already changed drastically, and a hint of panic welled up in his heart for the very first time. The most terrifying enemies were always the unknown ones, and he had never encountered a situation like this before. Request reinforcements from the main control center right away. As soon as the giant sea soul beast had appeared, the alarm had already been sounded in the central legion, so everyone there was also keeping a close eye on the unfolding situation. Even before Chen Zhou's request for reinforcements had arrived, Guanzi had already issued some orders. All air units of the Central Legion and Northwest Legion are to take flight and prepare to offer reinforcements. Invite the representatives of the Spirit Pagoda, Shrek Academy, and the Tank Sect to meet me here. All battle gods of the Battle God Hall, prepare for battle. This sudden turn of events had arrived far too abruptly, and everyone was caught off guard. Guyuna had only just issued her warning, and the enemy had already arrived. Old man Chen, what is that thing? Do you recognize it? Guanzi asked. In terms of battles on the sea, no one was more experienced and capable than Chen Xinji, and he was also the most familiar with everything in the sea. Currently, Chen Xinji wore a grim expression, just like his son. He had also never seen such an enormous sea soul beast. I'm afraid I don't know what it is. It should be a whale-type sea soul beast, but it's the first time I've ever seen one of this size. We can only pray that it doesn't have anything to do with the abyssal plane. Judging from the scope and degree of influence it has on the weather and the sea, I can tell it's at least a quasi-god level soul beast. It's most likely even more powerful than I am. In addition to that, its powers are enhanced in the sea, so our fleets won't be able to stand against it. Commander, I would like to be deployed to assist the three fleets in stabilizing the situation. All right. That request was exactly what Guanzi had been waiting for. With Chen Xinji leading the Sea God Legion, the entire legion's combat prowess would be raised by at least 30%. Furthermore, as a quasi-god, he would definitely be able to hold his own against this formidable enemy. Boom. 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 Right at this moment, three resounding booms suddenly rang out from the communicator in the main control center, and everyone's eyes were instantly drawn toward it. Through the sole communication devices hanging on the wall, everyone was stunned to discover that a series of explosions had taken place, and they had been set off right where the Blood God Legion was currently setting up the Blood God Array, which was also where the abyssal passageway had disappeared earlier. This was what everyone least wanted to see, and it was happening at the worst time possible. Guanzi immediately rose to his feet and yelled, "What's going on?" In the next instant, the image being displayed provided an answer to his question. A gigantic pillar of grey light suddenly erupted out of the ground, and the Blood God Array that was still under construction was instantly destroyed. The defensive weaponry set up around the side immediately opened fire, but all of the artillery fire was instantly devoured by the grey light. A series of figures began to emerge from within the grey light. They were all guardian longhorn beetles. Countless abyssal creatures flew up from the backs of these guardian longhorn beetles, unleashing attacks in all directions. The abyssal passageway had reopened, and the abyssal creatures had returned. Even without the order from Guanzi, all of the defense systems were activated, and all types of soul weapons were being fired. In the blink of an eye, the peaceful northernmost region was plunged into a state of complete chaos once again. Guanzi quickly composed himself before turning to Chen Xinji. Old man Chen, ignore everything here and go to the Sea God Legion. If our defenses on the sea were to crumble, we'll be unable to stop the invasion of the abyssal creatures. Chen Xinji gave an affirmative response before immediately departing. There was no way he could make his presence felt on the entire battlefield, so he had to go to the place where he would be most effective. Guanzi then turned to Guyuna. Chairwoman Gu, I'll have to trouble you as well. Please lead the powerful beings of the Spirit Pagoda to assist us. Guyuna nodded in response before also departing. For her, abyssal energy was extremely important. The sudden return of the abyssal plane shook the entire federal army, and the only thing they could be thankful of was that all of their troops were still present on the northern front. The Tank Sect and Shrek Academy encampment was instantly informed of the situation as well, and Ling Zichen immediately rushed out of her room, arriving beside the secondary tree of life before casting her gaze into the distance. From her position, she could see the artillery fire in the distance and hear the violent explosions. Her brows furrowed tightly as she murmured to herself, I didn't think they would recover so quickly. Looks like Eternal Heaven wasn't able to deal a decisive blow on them. After being converted into a laser, Eternal Heaven is only able to unleash around a third of its power. What a pity. She raised her head and looked up at the secondary tree of life beside her as she spoke. Yali had strictly prohibited her from leaving this place. She had to recover with the nourishment of the secondary tree of life, and it was particularly important for her to replenish her own life energy. Chapter 1840, Recommencement of the Battle. Furthermore, she could never use Eternal Heaven again. Yali had told her that some of the damage caused to her body from firing Eternal Heaven the first time couldn't be repaired through treatment. She would only be able to recover from an extensive period of rest and recuperation, and even then, it would perhaps be impossible to recover fully. Yali had told her in private that even if she could make a recovery, it would be very unlikely for her to live past the age of 60 as the impact from the blast had caused extremely severe harm to the core of her being. This was something that Ling Zichen had kept to herself. Now that the abyssal creatures had returned, a peculiar light began to glow in her eyes. She cast a meaningful gaze toward the explosions in the distance, then turned and quickly strode back to her own room. She opened her soul screen and quickly entered a string of numbers to complete a decryption process, then began to organize some of the information she had collected over the past few days. This information was going to be an extremely precious resource to the Tang Sect. The chaos outside seemed to have nothing to do with her anymore, and at a time like this, no one from Shrek Academy or the Tang Sect would come to find her. As such, no one was aware of what she was doing. On the same mountaintop, all of the powerful beings from Shrek Academy and the Tang Sect had emerged from their barracks and were appraising the distant explosions with grim expressions. The abyssal army had returned, and this time, Eternal Heaven was no longer at their disposal. They had even received news that the three naval fleets had also been attacked, and this was undoubtedly going to become an extremely fierce and arduous battle. All of the limit Douluos from Shrek Academy and the Tang Sect had already gathered together, and Zhang Xin said, our enemies must be very aware of what we're doing. They must have chosen to attack at this time as they didn't want us to complete the Blood God Array. On top of that, they've definitely come prepared. They're even closer to our defensive line this time, so they'll be sure to try and break through at all cost. We can't use Eternal Heaven anymore, so we'll have to face them head on. Elder Long, do you have any suggestions? The main control center is already requesting us to reinforce the front lines. Long Yeu immediately replied, Wuling still hasn't come out of seclusion yet. In this situation, the forces from our Shrek Academy and the Tang Sect can't afford to be separated, so I suggest everyone from our academy temporarily join your Tang Sect's forces to go into battle together. That way, we'll be able to minimize casualties. As for the old bones like you and me, we're naturally going to have to face those abyssal sovereigns and emperors. She cast her gaze toward the distance as she spoke. What was he doing? The Sea God Legion had been attacked, so he definitely wouldn't just be standing by idly. The enemy was able to create effective attacks from both sides, so even though they no longer had the Blood River Godslayer array, this defensive effort wasn't going to be any less difficult. Zhang Xin nodded in response. It looks like that's our best course of action. I didn't think the abyssal plane would return so soon. We can only hope that Wuling will also return soon. Without his golden dragon spear, this will be a very difficult battle. The Tang Sect's forces were led by Zhang Xin, as well as the powerful beings of the Douluo Palace, and among them, there were a total of 15 titled Douluos, 5 of whom were or above the hyper Douluo level. If it weren't for the Shrek City bombing, this number would be even higher. Meanwhile, Shrek Academy's forces were led by Long Yeu and the other limit Douluos, as well as Shrek's 7 monsters and the other powerful beings of the younger generation, including Wu Zhangkong, Lan Muzi, Tang Yunmeng, Yang Niangsha, Zheng Yuren, Shu Yicheng, Luo Gixing, Wu Sijuo, Douluo, and other elite members of Tang Wuling's cohort. Due to the premature end to the first battle brought about by the eternal heaven blast, they weren't required to offer their services, but on this occasion, they would have to go into battle as well. Zhang Xin turned to everyone and said, "In Wuling's absence, I'll act as commander in this battle. All the Douluos follow me. Our targets are the emperors and sovereigns of the abyssal plane. Abyssal creatures may be able to resurrect themselves, but the more powerful an abyssal creature is, the longer the resurrection process would take. So we need to take out as many of these emperors and sovereigns as possible. Everyone else, make sure to stick together in large units. Those from the Douluo palace will be split up into 10 groups of 100, while the titled Douluos of Shrek Academy will be evenly distributed among those groups. In the initial phase of this battle, we'll primarily rely on mechas to conserve our forces as much as possible. Make sure to constantly look out for one another and provide reinforcements to other groups when required. Understood? Understood." Everyone replied in unison. Zhang Xin then turned to Wu Zhangkong and said, "Zhangkong, you form a group of 10 with Lan Muzi, Tang Yunmeng, Shrek 6 Monsters, and Sima Jingkai, and your group will be responsible for staying back and providing reinforcements to whichever group requires reinforcements. I'll put you in charge of that." Understood. Zhang Xin had assigned him with the task of overseeing this extremely important group rather than the more powerful Lan Muzi, primarily because he clearly shared a closer bond with this generation of Shrek's 7 monsters. "All right, let's set off right away." Zhang Xin rose up into the air as he spoke, and all of the limit Douluos, as well as Araheng, rose up behind him before setting off for the battlefield. Everyone else followed along closely behind them. First came Wu Zhangkong's group, then the 10 groups from the Douluo palace. In that instant, the Tang sect was finally displaying its power as a series of massive mechas emerged from their ranks. All of these mechas were black, and 1 or 2 black mechas wouldn't be much to take note of in any army, but an entire squadron of black mechas presented a very remarkable sight. Only super organizations like the Tang sect and the Spirit Pagoda would possess such astounding power. The Spirit Pagoda was certainly extremely wealthy, but their research was almost exclusively focused on soul spirits, so they were still considerably lagging behind compared with the Tang sect when it came to technology. At this point, the battle had already commenced. One guardian longhorned beetle after another emerged from the abyssal plane, and they were using their own bodies to defend the powerful abyssal beings behind them from the first round of ferocious attacks. In order to seal the abyssal passageway, the federal legions were also sparing no effort. All types of large defensive soul tools had been set up around the site, not just up close, but also on the mountaintops in the distance. The guardian longhorned beetles possessed extremely formidable defensive prowess, but in the face of such heavy and concentrated fire, one would still occasionally perish. The abyssal creatures that were exposed as a result naturally fared even worse, and they were all reduced to grey abyssal energy. At this point, the pillar of grey light had faded, and the abyssal passageway was revealed as a bottomless black pit. Roar, roar, roar. A string of low roars echoed within the abyssal passageway, and in the next instant, an enormous abyssal creature emerged. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.